The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the vast, dusty plains. The air was thick with the heat of the late afternoon, and the sound of a distant windmill creaking in the breeze was the only noise that disturbed the silence. John Miller, a seasoned rancher, wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished the day's work. His calloused hands gripped the reins of his horse, guiding it through the dry, cracked earth towards his modest ranch. He was a man used to hard labor, and the long days spent working the land had made him tough, but today, something felt different. John had always been a quiet man. He didn't speak much to others, preferring the solitude of his land, the wide open spaces that seemed to stretch on forever. His ranch was small, but it was his. He'd worked for years to make it a place where he and his family could live in peace. His wife, Mary, and their 2 young children, Emily and Samuel, had made the ranch their home. It wasn't much, but it was enough. However, as the sun sank lower, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The news from the neighboring towns had been troubling. Reports of cattle rustling, burned homes, and outlaws riding through the region had grown more frequent. It was no secret that Jesse Black and his gang had been terrorizing the area. They were ruthless, feared by all, and no one had dared stand up to them. John had heard stories, whispered warnings about the man who was said to be as cold as the grave. John wasn't one to be easily intimidated. He'd lived through tough times before, and his resolve had never wavered. But tonight, as he rode back to his family, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the rumors about Jesse Black. It was the sense that trouble was closer than ever. As he neared the ranch, John spotted a figure on the horizon. The rider was still far off, but there was something about him that made John's heart race. The figure didn't move like a normal rider. There was no bouncing motion from the saddle, no sign of the easy, relaxed posture of a man at ease. Instead, the rider's silhouette stood rigid, tense. John's instincts kicked in. His hand instinctively went to the rifle at his side. He slowed his horse, watching the figure closely. As the rider drew nearer, John's stomach dropped. He knew that face. The sharp jaw, the dark eyes that never seemed to blink, and the cold smile that sent a chill down his spine. Jesse Black. John's horse stopped in its tracks, and for a moment everything went silent. The wind stopped blowing, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Jesse pulled his horse to a halt just a few feet away, his cold gaze never leaving John's eyes. "Well, well," Jesse said, his voice low and steady. "Looks like I've found the man I've been looking for." John didn't speak. He knew better than to waste words with a man like Jesse Black. The outlaw had a way of making people talk whether they wanted to or not. His reputation was built on fear, and it was a fear that John had lived with for weeks now. "I've heard a lot about you, John," Jesse continued, his voice almost friendly, as though they were old acquaintances. "A good man, they say. A man who's built himself a little piece of heaven out here in the middle of nowhere. But you see, I have a different idea about what you're doing here." John's grip on the reins tightened, but he didn't answer. He knew that anything he said could make things worse. Instead, he chose to watch Jesse, his heart pounding in his chest. Jesse slid off his horse slowly, as if savoring the moment. His boots crunched against the dry earth as he approached John. The air seemed to grow colder, though the sun was still high in the sky. Jesse was close now, close enough that John could feel the heat radiating from his body, the unmistakable sense of danger that always accompanied the outlaw. "I came to give you a choice, John," Jesse said, his voice soft, almost too calm. "You see, I've got a little problem. My men and I are hungry and we need some supplies. I thought maybe you could help with that." John's heart raced, but he didn't show it. He'd seen enough violence in his life to know when someone was trying to manipulate him. He had 2 choices: give in to Jesse and lose everything, or stand up and risk his life. Either way, it didn't look good. "I'm not giving you anything," John said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "This ranch is mine, and I'm not going to let you take it." Jesse smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made John's blood run cold. The outlaw's eyes flickered to the house where Mary and the children had come outside, drawn by the sound of horses. They stood at the porch, unaware of the danger that was closing in on them. "You know, John," Jesse said, his tone shifting, "I was hoping we could settle this without any trouble. But if you insist on making this difficult, then I'll have to take a different approach. I've got a lot of men and we don't like to wait. If you won't cooperate, I'll make sure your family knows what happens to those who refuse me." John's eyes darted to his wife and children. The thought of them getting caught in this madness was enough to make his blood boil. But he couldn't let them see his fear. He couldn't let Jesse see that he was losing control. "Please," John said, his voice low and desperate. "Just make it quick. Take what you want, but leave them out of it." Jesse's grin widened, and for a moment John saw something in his eyes, something darker than he had ever imagined. It was as if Jesse took pleasure in the fear he saw in others, as if he fed off it. The outlaw stepped back, his hand resting casually on the handle of his pistol. "Quick, huh?" Jesse mused. "You don't really get to choose that, John. But I'll tell you what, I'll make sure it's over before you know it. No need for a long, drawn-out affair. Just hand it over and we'll all be done here." John's heart pounded in his chest. His thoughts raced as he struggled to find a way out. But there was no escape. He could feel it in his bones. Jesse Black wasn't going to let him go without taking what he wanted. "Please," John repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Just make it quick." Jesse's laugh echoed in the silence. "Oh, it'll be quick, John, just not in the way you think." With that, Jesse turned and signaled to his men who were waiting nearby. The sound of horses' hooves echoed through the plains as the gang closed in. John's mind raced as he realized that his world was about to come crashing down. John's heart was pounding in his chest as Jesse's men began to circle his ranch. The sound of hooves grew louder, and the weight of the situation pressed down on him like a stone. His mind raced, but his body was frozen, unable to move. He could hear the distant voices of his wife and children calling out to him, but he didn't dare look back. If he did, it would be the end. Jesse Black, the man who had caused fear in every town and ranch for miles, was here, standing just feet away from him, smiling as though he was in complete control. And in that moment, John realized something he had never truly accepted before. This wasn't about a cattle raid or a few stolen supplies. This was about power. Jesse wanted to break him, to make him see that no one was beyond his reach, not even a man like John Miller. With a sharp motion, Jesse gave the signal, and his men moved forward. They dismounted, their boots sinking into the dry earth as they fanned out, surrounding the ranch. John's stomach twisted and his mind screamed for action. He couldn't just stand there. He couldn't let his family see him like this, helpless and broken. But then Jesse spoke again, his voice smooth and cold. "I told you, John, it's better this way. No need to make a scene. Just hand over the land and we'll be on our way. You can keep your life. Your family can keep theirs." The words were chilling, but John knew there was no way out. He had made his choice. He had pleaded with Jesse, hoping for mercy, but he was only fooling himself. Jesse didn't care about mercy. He was the devil, and John had fallen into his trap. "Please," John said again, his voice trembling, but he forced himself to stand tall. "I'll give you whatever you want. Just leave them alone."
"Take the ranch."
"It's all I have, but I'll give it to you." Jesse chuckled softly, the sound as cold as the night air. He took a few steps closer to John, his eyes locked on his with a calculating intensity. "You think you can buy your way out of this with your ranch, John? You really believe that?" John swallowed hard, his throat dry. His mind was spinning, but he couldn't back down now. His family was everything to him. He would do anything to protect them. Anything. But Jesse wasn't done. "Here's the thing, John, I don't need your ranch. I don't need anything you have, but what I do need is for you to realize just how powerless you really are." John's chest tightened. He had expected violence, but not this. Not this cold, calculated game that Jesse was playing. The outlaw was toying with him, making him feel small, insignificant. And the worst part was John couldn't do anything about it. Jesse motioned to one of his men, who stepped forward, a long knife in hand. The man grinned, his eyes gleaming with malice. "We don't want to hurt you, John, not if you cooperate. But we have our ways of convincing people. I'm sure you've heard the stories." John's breath caught in his throat. He had heard the stories. Stories of men who crossed Jesse Black only to end up broken and scarred, both physically and mentally. The fear that had been gnawing at him grew stronger, but he forced it down. He couldn't show fear. Not now. He glanced over his shoulder towards the house. Mary and the children were still standing there watching, but they hadn't fully grasped what was happening yet. They were too far away to hear the conversation, but John knew they would soon realize the danger. They would know that Jesse Black had come to take everything from them. Jesse followed John's gaze and smiled, a cruel, wicked smile. "You're a family man, I can see that. That's what makes this so much more fun. He paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air like poison. But don't worry. I'm not here to kill you, not yet. I'm just here to make sure you understand who's in charge. John's hands clenched into fists, but he knew there was no fight left in him. He could feel the weight of Jesse's words pressing down on him, making him feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He had always prided himself on his strength, his ability to protect his family. But here, standing in front of Jesse Black and his men, he felt completely powerless. Jesse's voice snapped him back to reality. Here's how it's going to go, John. You're going to come with me to town. You're going to sign over your land, and I'll make sure nothing happens to your family. You'll live out the rest of your days knowing who owns you. John looked at Jesse, his face pale but resolute. He knew that this was his last chance to do something. If he didn't act now, if he didn't stand up to Jesse, then everything he had worked for, his family, his land, his dignity, would be gone forever. His eyes flicked to the rifle resting on the porch. It was too far away to reach, but it was all he had. His fingers twitched, and for a split second he considered making a move, grabbing the rifle and fighting back. But he quickly discarded the thought. Jesse's men were too close, and he didn't stand a chance against them. As if reading his thoughts, Jesse spoke again, his voice a low, mocking drawl. You're thinking of making a move, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. But don't waste your time, John. You're outnumbered and you're outmatched. The best thing you can do is surrender. John stood there, his fist clenched, the weight of Jesse's words sinking in. His family's safety was all that mattered now. He had no choice but to give in, to surrender. But as he looked at Jesse, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just losing his ranch. Jesse wanted something more. He wanted to break him. He wanted to see John's spirit crushed beneath his heel. John didn't say anything. He just nodded, defeated. He could feel the tears welling up behind his eyes, but he fought them back. This wasn't the time for weakness. He had to be strong. For Mary, for Emily, for Samuel. Jesse's men moved closer, and the sound of their boots crunching on the dry earth echoed in the air. John knew that this was the end. He had lost. But as he walked towards the horse Jesse had brought for him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a battle for his land. It was a battle for his soul. And in that moment, he realized that the real fight was only just beginning.